Eventually, those altercations spilled onto the Oregon and California trails and caused the federal government to become interested.
In January 1863, a U.S. Army military force of nearly 400 from Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City, commanded by Colonel Patrick Connor and guided by Porter Rockwell, surrounded and killed nearly 350 Shoshone in their winter camp near Preston, Idaho, in the battle now known as the Bear River Massacre.
The day before the massacre, there were 3 Shoshones in Cache Valley at the Bishop's storehouse getting some supplies from the Mormons. And they saw some soldiers coming. And the farmer who was in charge of the food supply there told the Indians that he had heard that soldiers were coming and were going to take care of them once and for all. And so they rode back and reported what they had heard. And in fact, I've heard that there were other farmers in the area who were friendly with the Indians who also warned them that Colonel Connor was coming to kill them. And they weren't really that concerned about it because they really hadn't been involved in some of those major incidents. And Sagwitch, who was the chief, who, by the way, also happened to be my great-great-grandfather, said, you know, we really don't have anything to be concerned about. If they come and they ask about something, you know, if we have information, we'll give it. If we're just not worried about being attacked by them. Anyway, that night, the night preceding the massacre, there was an old man in the tribe named Tindup. And he had a dream, and he saw the tribe being attacked by the soldiers. And he told Segwitch, and they called a council, and Tindup told his story. He says, I've had a dream that we're going to be attacked by the soldiers, and if you want to live, you'll leave tonight with me. And there were a lot of people that went with him. They went around the backside over toward Malad and then to the Brigham City area. And it took them about maybe all night the next morning to get there. But the ones who stayed were attacked the next morning. And there was no questions asked, they just attacked the village.
Federal troops on January 29th, 1863, came upon a sleeping Shoshone village located not far from where Preston, Idaho, now has been established. And as light was just breaking, they attacked that village head-on without provocation. And by a period of 3 or 4 hours later on that bitterly cold day, you had about 350 Shoshone men, women, children, and babies massacred and laying on the ground. And you had a triumphant Colonel Patrick Edward Connor who marched back to Camp Douglas in victory and was soon appointed Brigadier General for his great bravery in this fight against the Shoshone. What he did, though, was decimate several of these Shoshone tribes, many of which were very peaceful, and absolutely destroyed a few of the bands, including Chief Bear Hunter's band. Bear Hunter was killed, and there were only 8 people from his entire band that survived that massacre. One of the chieftains who was initially reported killed, and as it would turn out very soon, was very much alive but wounded, was named Sagwitch. And Sagwitch had always been known as the peaceable chieftain that the early settlers in Cache Valley and other settlements in northern Utah could talk to and could negotiate agreements with. He had a brief period where he sought revenge and would shoot animals in the field and just leave them as his way of showing how devastated his people were by this unprovoked battle-turned-massacre. He had a 2-year-old son, interestingly, who was shot 7 times. Can you imagine a 2-year-old, if there would even be space in a body that small for 7 flesh wounds? But when Sagwitch and the others returned to the battlefield at night when it was safe for them to come back, they found this little boy whose name was Bishop, which means red clay. And he was still wandering around the massacre ground with all these bloody spots through his clothing, holding a little bowl of frozen pine nut gravy that had been his breakfast.
I think life for the Shoshone people after the massacre was very difficult. I think for them, they knew that their life as Shoshone people was coming to an end and that they did have to change. But I think the change was for the better, that they knew that in order to survive, you had to change. I think that for them, having almost all of their people wiped out, things for them would never be the same. Like I said, there were good and there were bad things. But I think in the end, it was a good change for them.
So 10 years after this horrid event, Sagwitch had spent those intervening years doing whatever he could to support his family, as did the other Shoshone who had survived. They would break horses for the local settlers. They were very good at that. They were herders. They would provide actually entertainment at pioneer festivals. They would perform native dances. But life was very tough for those good people.
The development of transportation and communication brought more settlement and the need for the spiritual stability, always so important to the LDS people, whose temples are a foundation for a way of life that inspired so many to endure so much.
In March of 1873, Sagwitch had some spiritual experiences. We'll never know exactly what they were because he was not literate, so he could not personally record those events. But the surviving accounts of others that he spoke with described them as visions and dreams where Sagwitch saw the future of his people, and he saw that they should be settled as farmers living in Box Elder County. And whatever experiences he had were very powerful, and they led him to immediately get up and saddle a horse, take some of his other fellow chieftains, and head into Ogden. And they headed there because there was a man named George Washington Hill, who the Indians had known since the 1850s. And they called him Ankapompy, which means red hair. He had flaming red hair. And they visited with him and they said, "We've seen you in our dreams. You are the one that we have seen is to baptize us." And I'm sure it came as a complete surprise to George Washington Hill. And he said, "Well, you know, that's not my duty in the church. Go into downtown Ogden and the brethren there will be happy to accommodate you." That wasn't the answer they wanted, and over the next week and a half they went time and time again until George Washington Hill finally agreed to come out and baptize Sagwitch's people. So in a single afternoon, George Washington Hill taught the rudiments of the gospel to Sagwitch's entire band, and before nightfall, all 101 members of that band, including Sagwitch, were baptized in the waters of the Bear River, not too far from the city of Bear River. And from that point on, they were Latter-day Saints.
Early in the 1870s, Brigham Young announced that in the General Conference of the Church that the territory of Utah was going to be divided into 4 different regions. It would be the St. George region, the Manti region, the Salt Lake region, and the Logan region. And each of those regions would have a temple. And the people in each of those regions would be required to raise the funds and the manpower to build these temples. Well, it was an exciting moment for those individuals that lived in Manti and Logan, and the St. George Temple was underway, but this was the first official announcement that there'd be the temples in Manti and in Logan.
Brigham Young came into the valley with, I think, a lot of things in mind. The early settlers had picked a block in what became downtown Logan, you know, one of the traditional Mormon blocks, for the site of the tabernacle. They had also, right north of the block where the tabernacle is today, that entire block was the tithing yard. So the church had, you know, ownership of some of the most significant land in the valley. They began working on a tabernacle. They had a number of different designs. The tabernacles and the temples, even though they'd abandoned them in Kirtland, Ohio and Nauvoo, Illinois, were a sign of permanence. And they had started on the Salt Lake Temple, and you know, it took 40 years to build it. But in the meantime, they had made a decision to take the temples out to the people in these more isolated settlements, you know, 80+ miles away from Salt Lake. And so they had started building the tabernacle, and a number of the masons, woodworkers, those people had tried to develop some sense of how to use the local materials while building the tabernacle.
Then we go down to 1877, and Brigham Young is in Cache Valley visiting his 2 daughters that were married to George Washington Thatcher. And one morning he took his little grandson by the hand and said, "Come on, Georgie, come with me. We're going to go select a site for a temple to be built." And he went to where the Logan Temple now stands. The architect of the Logan Temple was Truman O. Angel, who had also helped out with the Salt Lake Temple and with others. He's a famous Latter-day Saint architect and one of the best in the church, and he drew up sketches for a magnificent building. The West Tower is 160 feet in the air, and the East Tower of it is 170 feet in the air, and it just towers over the valley. It's a marvelous sight because it can be seen from almost anywhere.
Once they had the design of the temple, then what the local church leaders did was take these people who had been developing their skills, they abandoned the tabernacle project, moved them up on the hill, and using the quarries locally, using local lumber, they began preparing to construct on that alluvial fan overlooking the valley their temple, their symbol of permanence and their symbol of worship.
Charles Ricard was my great-grandfather. He was born in upper state New York, where he came in contact with the church, came across the plain.